Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And I am so excited today to be joined by the fantastic Antonia Gentry, who's currently starring in the Netflix series Ginny and Georgia. And one of the things I was interested in is when you were working on the first couple of episodes, because you had Anya Adams, who actually directed episode 1 and 2. And so I was interested in how you worked with her and Deborah Fisher, who's the showrunner, in really finding the tone of the overall show and what the voice of this character was going to be when you first started working on the series together.
Yeah, the showrunner Deb and Anya and the show creator Sarah Lampert were all such wonderful people to work with. To be honest, it throughout filming the show, finding the tone of the show was one of the hardest things because it's just kind of all over the place, and so it kind of has a little bit of everything in it. You know, it's dark, it's light, it's funny, it's sad, it's got mystery, it's got so many, it's got romance. So finding that kind of balance at first was a bit of a challenge in terms of, for me anyway, because I was like, these scripts are so like everything happens all at once sometimes in each episode, so I'm like, what is going on? But working with Deb and Sarah and then Anya for the first couple of episodes was so cool, because they kind of really took me under their wing and they said, hey, follow your instincts, and whatever feels true to you is true to the character. So that was really, really nice to kind of have that kind of creative control over a character that I haven't really had before, especially for my first big role. So super appreciative of them.
And obviously a huge central theme of the show is this mother-daughter relationship and all of the intricacies and complexities that come with that. And there's a very unique dynamic that exists between the two of them, because her mom was fairly young when she had her. Her dad is still in the picture, but she's really been raised by her mom with just the two of them and her younger brother. And at the same time, there's a little bit of distance there because her mom is keeping so many secrets from her and she starts to find out some of these details. So as much as there's a very unique, special closeness because of the single mom element, there's also a little bit of a distance. So how did you and Brianne Howie really figure out, what the mix of that dynamic was going to be, in the spaces where they really let themselves open up to each other, but also the places where they really hold back from each other at the same time?
I think it was actually, Brianne and I are only 8 years apart in real life. And so we felt more like sisters. And I think that really helped the relationship between Ginny and Georgia, because they are so close in age, and so they kind of have more of a friendship sort of relationship when it comes to their lighter moments and their more intimate moments. But what was fun with playing with Brianne was that undercurrent where that the both of them, even though they can have really tender moments with each other, underneath it all, there are secrets that they're keeping from each other. And I think playing with that underneath, that kind of tension underneath maybe the lighter moments was really, really fun, but also they're kind of at each other's throats a lot. So it was more of a challenge when we had to kind of argue with each other a lot and be mean to each other, because we love each other so much in real life that adding that element of the kind of volatile relationship that they have was just really interesting to play with, for sure.
And there's something, so specific about the fact that Ginny's 15, she's at that age where she's really mature in certain ways, but she's still very trepidatious and trying to figure out a lot of things about who she is. But at the same time, she's also been forced to grow up in certain ways. So there are spaces in which she has a maturity beyond her years, particularly when you look at her relationship and her protectiveness with her brother. So how did you kind of go through the scripts and think about the spaces where she would have that extended maturity because of her life experiences?
Yeah, I think it's usually Ginny she's used to being at the expense of all of her mom's whims and being moved around all the time. And, her mom has a very specific way of viewing the world that she always preaches to Ginny. And so, but Ginny's very smart, she may be shy and she may be introverted, but she's got a very keen eye and she can read people. She knows when her mom is, turning on her charm or when she's not. And so I guess for her, it's kind of just been this natural progression throughout her life of having to balance that out with her mom and to protect her brother or to protect herself in ways that her mom can't really, because she was raised a lot differently than Ginny, but Ginny doesn't quite understand that. She just knows that Georgia has this wild card upbringing. And so I think we see Ginny kind of switch back and forth between just being a teenager who doesn't really have any of the answers to being like the mature, almost kind of pseudo adult who thinks she can handle it all, but she's still kind of overwhelmed by it. So yeah, she's really just bouncing, but it's like racquetball. She's just kind of bouncing off the wall between any side of one of her mom's crazy schemes and things like that.
But that racquetball element even extends to the way that they talk to each other. And there's such a specific cadence and rhythm that the two of you found with each other. Were you consciously trying to figure out what that verbal dynamic would be? Or was it something that you just found very naturally together once you started shooting scenes?
To be honest, it just felt like, I don't know, it kind of just came pretty easily for us. And I think part of that has to do with how the show is written. It's very pop cultural, it's very tongue in cheek. And I know I personally, I'm a pretty sarcastic person, actually. So Ginny's sarcasm was really easy for me to kind of melt into because I mean, it took me a while. Like, I will be very sincere and people will still think I'm being sarcastic just because like I just sound, I don't know. I had to work really hard on differentiating between when I'm being serious and sincere and when I'm being sarcastic. So to have a character that's like really comfortable in that kind of element with the dry humor and the rolling of the eyes and all of that was really fun to play with.
There's also an interesting shift in how she perceives her mom throughout the show as well. You know, one of those elements being the way that she's always looked at her mom as being very adept with relationships. And then she actually realizes that her mom doesn't really know what she's doing and has a lot of uncertainty and doesn't necessarily fall for the right people in her life. So how did you think throughout the series about the different ways in which she would look up to her mom and how that perception really shifts for her?
I think Ginny really idolizes her mom, especially in the beginning. You really see that. She takes everything that her mom says to heart, but doesn't quite know how to apply it to her own life. And a lot of that has to do with fundamental differences between the two of them. You know, Georgia is a lot more comfortable in her sexuality and she uses it as a weapon. She's in control, or so it seems, and she's very, very good at projecting that. Whereas Ginny is so uncertain, she's so insecure, and you know, also her mom is this wonderful, beautiful blonde bombshell with a beautiful smile and things like that. And Ginny doesn't really kind of fit the conventional you know, image of beauty that we are typically used to seeing, at least in the media. And so being a teenage girl and having to figure out how your image is portrayed and accepted or not accepted by your peers is really confusing. And I think Ginny tries so hard to emulate all of the things that her mom seems to do so effortlessly and kind of runs into walls. And so it frustrates her. But then as we see the season progress and we see a lot of things, you know, Ginny uncovering things of her mother's past and realizing that her mom is just as fallible and human as anyone is. You really kind of see that shift in Ginny's perspective of her mom, for sure. Yeah. But you also see how like Ginny is also like Georgia in a lot of ways too. So
when you looked particularly at Brienne's performance and how she was inhabiting the character of Georgia, did you kind of find certain inflections or certain behaviors that you really wanted to pull into your performance, thinking about characteristics that and traits that she would have adopted from her mom?
Well, yeah, I think when we see Ginny kind of getting new friends and becoming a bit more popular, and she has the interest of two, not just one, but two hot guys who are interested in her. She's trying to juggle it all. And so there are some moments where you see kind of like, I think in episode 5, for example, the Halloween episode, when they're at the berry tree and Ming is trying to figure out what they're going to dress up as for Halloween. And you see Samantha, who we've seen throughout the beginning of the series, kind of have little small digs at Ginny, ask them, you know, what do we want to dress up as for Halloween? And her friends turn to Ginny and say, well, what do you think? And it's like the first time that people care about Ginny's opinion, and she kind of is already off on this high of like, oh, Hunter made a song for me, I'm like getting popular. So you kind of see this subtle shift in how she talks to her friends, and you kind of see her get a taste of power and kind of get a little bit drunk off of that. And I think that's where we kind of gradually see Ginny sort of reflecting her mom in that kind of way, where she kind of wants to manipulate the story in the way that she has control of. But it doesn't last long, but she tries. That's for sure.
And that friendship dynamic is something that's so new for her. And, she talks about how she's always really struggled to create friendships and relationships, especially having moved around so much. And so particularly in those very early episodes, and you were mentioning how she's really good at reading people. How did you kind of put that into a lot of the dynamics and conversations and early interactions with the other characters, where she's keeping everything to herself, but just very quietly reading everybody in the room and trying to figure out the situation that she's in with everybody?
I think there are some people who are wallflowers, I wouldn't necessarily call Ginny a wallflower since she hasn't really been around, a lot, but she has moved a lot. So she has been the new girl often. She knows all of the kind of archetypes and stereotypes of high school and the different personalities that, inevitably you'll run into. And so for her being so observant, I think she is so used to compartmentalizing a lot of things, and whether that be at home or in social situations. So when she's invited, for example, to the basement in episode 2, and everyone's kind of like smoking weed and like being like the cool teen party type thing, and she's awkward. She's never done that before. She doesn't really know how to interact with her peers and relate to them in that way. And so we see her trying and attempting to, but we also see her taking note of her mistakes and feeling a little bit self-conscious and kind of like filing that away in her head and not really saying anything or addressing it in the moment. And I think that has a lot to do with just how she's used to dealing with her mom and her people around her. She's not used to having a voice, so she's used to kind of just taking in information, storing it later, and then unfortunately she has different ways in which she copes with that I think I hope we explore in a responsible way. But yeah, where I'm leading. But yeah, she's just so sensitive, and I think she just really needs to be taken care of.
And in the fact that she's moving into this kind of very white, middle class suburban town in New England, that brings out certain sides and aspects of her personality. Did you find yourself thinking about the different places that she's lived and what those experiences would have been for her and what they would have really built up in her personality and characteristic wise?
Well, she's from the South, so even though she's moved around a lot, she's moved around a lot of places in the South. So, and I'm from the South. So it was I related to her I was able to kind of use my own experiences growing up in the South, being biracial, being, a bit, I was pretty shy at that age. I was pretty insecure too. And so I was able to kind of bring that to her character and kind of show it in a way that, you know, I, she, there's a lot more, there are like microaggressions, of course, and then there are not so covert forms of aggression. And Ginny is used to both. And I think it was when I was playing those moments for her, I was able to kind of draw on those experiences from my past and kind of bring, I hope, a form of honesty to the character in that regard. So yeah, I mean, although I personally haven't been one to have moved around a lot in my own life, growing up in the South though and being different, you constantly feel like you're a new person in different situations, even if you've been in the same town for a long time, if that makes sense. If you have that sense of otherness. And I think Ginny, that's what I try to bring to the character of Ginny in portraying those moments for her.
Yeah. And one of the friendships and dynamics that I love watching in the series is between her and Max. And Max really represents a lot of things that Ginny wishes that she could be. You know, as much as Max is very outgoing on the surface, and we learn that that's not necessarily the case underneath, you know, on the surface, that's kind of Ginny wishes that she could walk into a room in the same way. You know, and we do see her start to adopt some of those behaviors, like the basement scene that you were talking about, or even just the fact that Ginny's the one to be like, we're all going to dress as Britney Spears and this is what we're going to do. Or actually, we're going to sneak out of the house and we're going to go drink in this way. So how did you really look to that character and think about the traits that Ginny would really want to adopt and then would gradually pull into herself?
We actually approached it pretty subliminally throughout the episodes, as something or throughout the seasons, the episodes, oh my gosh, through something as small as Ginny's kind of wardrobe too. If you think about how she dresses in the beginning, she's very she wears a lot of layers. She kind of covers herself up. She doesn't really wear any makeup, doesn't really do anything with her hair. And then as she gets used to being friends with these girls, you kind of see her taking cues of how they dress and kind of changing the way she styles herself. Eventually she straightens her hair and tries to do little things to change her appearance and how she behaves that you can see are inspired by her friends. And I think yeah, for someone like Maxine, who is so vibrant and bright and like talks like 200 words a minute, and who is so sure of herself, or so it seems, taking cues from her is something that Ginny definitely does. And I think we see it when she says, when she has that secret affair with Marcus and not really wanting to reveal that because she doesn't want to ruin what she's a part of, and the part of that is fitting in with these people. And so I think at that age, at any age, we want to be accepted by our peers, but especially as teenagers, it's really hard to kind of strike that balance and to see what is considered acceptable and what isn't. And so Ginny, being that kind of observant person that she is, she definitely, you see her change, you see her evolve in a way that's a bit more similar to where she's Ginny in the beginning, she's like Mang in the middle, and then she's like Georgia at the end. And I think we really see her kind of take that journey.
And with that real kind of like tact of her being very observant in a lot of rooms, and elements that she can't necessarily share, like her relationship with Marcus, were there challenges performance wise to really finding a lot of those beats and the small ways that you wanted to convey that when it's such an internal journey for her?
Yeah, it was kind of I wasn't in the same position as Ginny when I was that age, in that I didn't have, this massive love triangle that I was trying to keep hidden from everybody. And so playing with that was definitely a new thing for me. And so much, like you were saying, so much of what she deals with is internalized. So figuring out what moments to kind of give the audience insight. She does have voiceover, so that helps break down what she's thinking internally, but in moments where she's kind of struggling to process something happening, but is also trying to hide it so that her people around her don't see, was really, it was kind of, I don't know if it was difficult so much as it was just really intriguing and fun to explore, because she is constantly walking on this tightrope. And I think the way that I would describe Ginny is that she's basically kind of like a live wire. She's so sensitive, she's so raw, but she's still capable of lashing out and shocking and biting before she gets hurt. And I think playing with that aspect of her personality was what I really clung to throughout the season, for sure.
And the show also really delicately deals with the theme of self-harm through your character. And, we see that in the scene when she's in the bedroom by herself. And again, that's a very internalized moment. And so I wanted to ask about the process in filming that scene, because it deals with a lot of different complexities for her. It deals with the emotional issues that she's struggling with, and also the way that she's really just fighting for some sense of control in her life. So what was the journey in all of you figuring out what the tone and dynamic of that scene in particular was going to be?
Well, we actually consulted with Mental Health America, which I was very pleased to hear about, the show creator and the showrunner taking that extra step to make sure that we represent this in a way that is responsible and not kind of exploitative and not just in it for shock value. I think teenagers, people in general, they cope with different traumas, with different insecurities, with different things in their lives in many different ways. And I think this is something that isn't so uncommon. It's not, we're recently seeing it portrayed in the media, but I would say that what the show tries to do, and I think does well, is it portrays it in a way that is sensitive and opens the door for conversation. So when although I've never personally had the same kind of coping mechanism that Ginny has, going into it knowing that we put into place those kind of precautions and care towards those scenes, I felt like I could then draw on the same kind of emotions that I know that Ginny is drawing on, and in what moves her to do these things, to do the self-harm, in a way that was authentic. But I knew that it wasn't going to be just kind of like a gimmick. And I think that is really valuable in the show. And I hope that if teenagers or if parents and their children are watching it together, that, it opens up the door for conversation, because I don't want, the main goal is to have people feel seen when watching the show. And I don't want anyone to feel like they are left out or are on their own. And so although that was a difficult subject and is still continuously a difficult subject to tackle, I think attempting to bring it to the forefront is important for sure.
And so much of it also feels like it stems from how she really has been holding so much inside and dealing with everything by herself and not being able to share everything. And to that point, the first person that really sees so much of this in her is Marcus, played by Felix Mallard. And at the same time, it's exciting to her, but it's also really, it exposes a lot of vulnerabilities in her. The fact that someone can see these things that no one ever has,
right?
Even when she doesn't say something out loud. So how did you find the balance in that relationship and that dynamic between the way in which it starts to make her feel seen and safe, but also the vulnerability and trepidation that exposes?
When Marcus opens up to Ginny in episode 3 in that locker room scene, I think that's when she kind of truly feels seen by someone. And excuse me, I think Felix has such a great presence about him. He has such a great focus. He really can break down the walls. And it was really fun working with him in those moments, those tender moments, because it was finally a moment where Ginny, she is vulnerable, but she doesn't feel like she's in danger, and she kind of has a voice. She has someone who is willing to listen to her, which is something that she's not used to, which is partly, like you were saying too, why she bottles everything up, and this is how she deals with it. And so opening the door to talking to a friend who's going to be non-judgmental and supportive is really, really important for her. And I think I'm so happy too that Marcus is the character that does that, because we have these first impressions of him where we think, oh, he's just going to be that typical kind of like dumb bad guy who doesn't care about anybody. But we see that he's actually really sensitive, and he's struggling too with his own grief and depression and mental health. And so, everybody has something that they deal with. And for Ginny and Marcus to connect in that way, not only in that way, but also just they are good friends when they're friends. They can be good friends to each other when he's not saying something stupid and when Ginny's not, trying to keep everything a secret. So you really do want them to hold on to that for each other.
And there's such a different dynamic between the two of them in scenes like in the locker room or when they're talking in her bedroom and it's just the two of them, as opposed to when they're in the same room together at school and there's a bunch of people around, because they can never say any of these things out loud in front of other people. So how did the two of you think about constructing the two very different dynamics that they have to have with each other?
Well, if you ask Felix, you'll know he's just, most of it is him stealing glances at Ginny as Ginny tries to ignore him. So I always feel his eyes on me while I'm trying to focus on Hunter or Maxine or whomever. And so, I felt bad that I had to ignore him in those public moments, but especially when he comes at the fall fest when they're doing face paint, and she does that kind of childish, she draws a penis on his face and he's just like, what the heck. And I think it really does just show how complicated performance is, in terms of, we're performative in front of our friends versus when we're at home, and there are different things that we put on and different scripts and codes that we adapt to depending on who we're around. And the fact that both of them do this in different ways, it just makes it all the more heartbreaking that they can't just kind of throw all of that to the side and just be genuine with each other openly until everything falls apart. So
And one of
yeah.
the other relationships that brings out such a different side in her as well that we get to see is her with her dad. He comes in for a couple of episodes, and obviously the dynamic between her and her dad is very different to her and her mom, in part because her dad isn't there for the day to day. Like, he doesn't have to be the disciplinarian. So there's a different kind of fun that they can have. But also it seems like she's very enamored with him in the spaces that he opens up for her. Like when he takes her to a poetry reading and stands up and reads a piece about fatherhood in front of her. So how did you really think about the construction of that relationship and the way that you wanted it to be so different and bring out completely different sides of who she is than the way she is with her mom?
Actually, when Nate, who plays Zion, when he came and we read we were at the table read for episode 8, because he arrives at the end of 7, but he's not really, his episodes are really episodes 8 and 9. When we had the table read for episode 8, which is the big slam poetry episode, I actually was so emotionally, I like was overwhelmed with emotion while we were reading, because I didn't realize until that moment that that was the missing puzzle piece. Seeing Nate, even though, we were just all like in our regular street clothes and at like a cafeteria table reading scripts, seeing him at the same table as me and reading the lines as Ginny's father, really made me feel more complete, like her identity. Oh, this is the missing piece. And so I actually like, I was just so, I don't know why, but I was just overcome with so much emotion that like after the table read, I had to run to the bathroom and like cry to the bathroom stall. No one knew about it. I just like cried for like 5 minutes, and then I was like, okay, we got to go film. Just because I just wanted that for Ginny. I could feel already that kind of natural inclination that she would have toward her dad, and seeing someone who, looks a little bit more like her, who looks at her and smiles. And he's someone that she idolizes in a different way that she idolizes her mom. And he has this sense of freedom about him. He he's sure of himself. He explores the world. He wants to learn about different cultures. He has a very kind of a hippie view of the world that Ginny doesn't necessarily. She wants to be that way, but she doesn't know how to get there. And when he is there, she can truly be, he sees through it. He sees through her masquerade. He sees through her trying to belong in this place in a way that isn't authentic. And so he tries to draw that authenticity from her in a way that Georgia can't. And I think playing with that and seeing that was just so, like, I just loved her so much. And I was like, you just need to be taken care of, and Zion's here finally to do that for you. Until, it's all ruined. But yeah.
And I also wanted to ask, because you're also a songwriter and musician, whether you use that as a channel into characters, and if you did so with Ginny, kind of how that really helped you to uncover certain elements of her.
Well, I knew that they wanted like Ginny to have like a keyboard and play piano, since that's what I do. But I also was, for example, Ginny's slam poem that she reads in class. I worked with Sarah Lampert, the show writer and creator, along with one of the other biracial writers from the writers' room. Her name is Bree, and her idea for that poem was the idea of checking boxes. And kind of, most biracial, multiracial people understand that, growing up, when you had to fill out standardized tests or anything like that, and there's a portion that says, select your race or ethnicity, choose only one. But if you're comprised of more than one race or more than one ethnicity, it kind of felt like you were rejecting a part of you just for the sake of a statistic. And so going into it with that already kind of being the groundwork from one of the writers from the writers' room, and being able to kind of collaborate and add to it and kind of change it into my own words or into Ginny's point of view, felt really empowering, and it felt like I had a voice. And personally, I love writing poetry too. So it just felt like I was able to kind of inject myself into that as well. And I never before have felt seen in that way. So it was very, very special.
Well, I loved your performance in the show so much, and I'm so excited for everyone to binge watch every single episode back to back. Thank you so much, Antonia.
Thank you.